Dr. Gabor Mate is a well-known trauma researcher and medical doctor. I've learned a huge amount from him about developmental trauma, and anybody who wanted to learn more about trauma, you could watch his TED Talks, you could go on his website. He has some books. He's got a lot of information out there now. He's interviewed a lot, and a lot of times those are put on YouTube. I've interviewed him twice now, and I'm happy to share those recordings with you as well. The first one in particular was really related to trauma and how it works. So he's an expert on developmental trauma as well as what happens as we kind of move through our adult years. And one of the things that he's really clear about is that we have this need to be connected with each other. And that's actually not something that scientists really recognized until the last, 15, 20 years. You might have noticed that there's been a lot of studies lately on loneliness and isolation. A few years ago, it was being sedentary is the new smoking, and now it's loneliness is the new smoking. So there is a recognition now starting to be really understood that we need to connect with other human beings, preferably, and other mammals is good too, cats and dogs and horses and things. But we need to know that we matter, especially as children. And so we need to have a feeling of connection, and we need to have physical, emotional safety as well, but we need to have this feeling of connection. If we don't have that feeling of connection, then we begin to believe that we're not worthy of it. If our parents or some adults in our lives don't seem to care about us, we don't feel like we really matter to anybody, then we turn that on ourselves, and we believe it's because we're not worthy of being loved. We're not worthy of being paid attention to and taken care of. Even though as an adult, we can see that that's not true. It is what children believe. We turn that against ourselves because that's our best chance of maintaining a connection, even if it's not a very good connection. So if we've never known love, if we've never lived in that way of being connected, of having someone's face light up when we walk into the room from school or whatever, being hugged or held or just that feeling that we really matter, that somebody really cares about us and our happiness, then we don't know how to do that. So what we're talking about is emotional co-regulation, and we need stable, well-regulated adults around us to co-regulate with. This isn't something that babies and children know how to do on their own. It's a beautiful picture. So people who have safe connections are able to stay present. Gabor Mate's definition of trauma, the effect of trauma, is that we disconnect from ourselves, from the present moment, and from our sense of value. And we need other people. And as babies and children, we need adults to reflect that back to us. An interesting statistic I came across a little while ago is that we only need about 30% of the time connection in order to feel connected. And so parents don't need to be perfect for sure. And I don't know that there are any perfect parents. I know I wasn't. No matter what the reason is, children will put that on themselves, but the reasons you generally have nothing to do with us. There's some kind of mental instability or trauma or violence or something going on in the adult's life. And we don't need to be perfectly regulated in order to help our children regulate. We just need maybe about 30%. For people who are parents, that's very helpful as well to know, is that we don't need to lash ourselves and really go into a shame spiral around what happened or didn't happen when our children were growing up. That there's reasons why all of this happens, and that we weren't trying to not be there for our kids. We were suffering from our own trauma, and now we're moving forward and healing, working on healing that. So here's the core deficiency belief. Scott Kilby talks about this a lot in the Living Inquiries. There's something fundamentally wrong with me. We are turning against ourselves all the time. This feeling of something wrong with us is what underlies a lot of anxiety and depression, and also a lot of addictions. So this feeling is so powerful that we just want to get away from it. Somebody's angry at us, we're afraid. Somebody cold, we feel alone. We just can't afford to feel humiliated, afraid, helpless. And so our nervous system comes in, our fight, flight, freeze system comes in and ensures that we'll never feel that again. So the way that generally is there's some kind of fight, flight. We get into a dissociated state, meaning that we're not really present. We're daydreaming. We're just not really there. It's one of the ways that we protect ourselves from feeling this kind of thing. And the way we turn against ourselves and hate ourselves is another way that we protect ourselves from completely disconnecting from our caregivers. This again is something that's natural and that's understandable, and that is often has a lot of there's a lot of trauma in that turning against ourselves, and we might experience that as the inner critic. We might experience it as the way we shame ourselves. So we were often shamed or made to feel like there was something wrong with us as children, and then we take that job on. So this is these last couple of slides are directly relevant to how we can work with mindfulness in healing this. Because if we are stuck in a shame spiral or we're really critical about ourselves, we don't actually want to just be mindful about that and observing that. We need to actually intervene and stop catastrophic thinking and stop the patterns that we've developed. It's actually not helpful to just stay present with some of these things. So now that we're adults, we can see that some of these patterns aren't true. So the belief that there's something wrong with me, we might be able to look at that now and go, okay, I there's nothing I could have done about my mom's depression. In fact, it didn't have anything to do with me. So the way I was always trying to, keep the house clean, or, the way I was always trying to be super good so my dad didn't turn on me, or whatever it might have been for us as children, that we can see now that those are strategies that we were using to keep ourselves as safe as possible. And then, in fact, a child doesn't have any control over their parents' mental health or addictions or violence or any of that. But it's that helplessness that feels so scary that we want to stop. So we turn it against ourselves and we go, well, if I was a little bit nicer, if I didn't cry as much, if I didn't, or if I did. And this is the birth of these core deficiency stories and the way we turn against ourselves. And now as adults, this is what we can work with. So Scott has a practice of welcoming. Thank you for arising. I love you. You're welcome to stay. It's based on the Ho'oponopono prayer. And again, this is something that ultimately we need to be able to welcome our holics. And the way that see that happening is not a kind of a gut wrenching, I'm going to do this. It's more of a getting to know ourselves and getting to understand the strategies that we've used, getting to become so familiar with the energy in our body that it doesn't scare us any longer. And as we feel safe enough to be present with whatever it is that's happening, it's because we understand in a real gut level that it's not here to hurt us. None of the sensations or energy in our body are here to hurt us. The thoughts in our mind might get us really stirred up and they might create a lot of fear, but the thoughts in our mind aren't here to hurt us either. And so we need to somehow make friends with all of what's going on inside. And the living inquiries are a really effective tool to do that, the way that we work with thoughts and energy and our inner critic and those kinds of things. When we're working with ourselves, what we're basically doing is getting to know ourselves. So we have this practice of coming into our body, getting to know what's going on in our body. We get to be more familiar with the energy, and in particular, the associations of thoughts with the energy in our body. And we always do it in a way that is very respectful of our defense mechanisms. So if you need to back away from it, if you need to back away a long ways away, if you just need to take a couple of breaths and take a little break, all of that is absolutely fine. There's never any pressure. And it's actually very counterproductive to push and to try and get to the bottom of something by really pushing into it. As we feel comfortable doing that, then we will. And then that's the time when we can really be present with ourselves and really see it. So to give yourselves absolute permission to not be pushy with this and to really honor your own defense mechanisms. And one of the ways that'll come up is you'll notice that you've dissociated, you've just kind of moved into some other train of thought. And so that's a little bit different than being present in the body with an energy and watching what thoughts are coming up. It's more likely to be something that's completely different. All of a sudden we start thinking about what we have to do later, or we might get angry and want to lash out at the person that we're with. There's all kinds of ways that we do that, but basically just to, as we get to know ourselves, to really honor that we do want to do the best we can, and our bodies do want to heal, and our minds do want to heal. It's not a good idea to push ourselves. It's always good to work in a very kind and patient way with ourselves. This is the basics of how the living inquirers works. We have words and pictures and sensations. And words are things that we hear. We might hear them in someone else's voice, or we might just kind of hear them in our own mind. And sometimes we can also put words up as though we're looking at them on a page. And then pictures are either video clips or still images, and we can see pictures. So all we can do with pictures really is see them. And with words, we can hear them or see them. And then we have all the sensations and feelings and energy in our body. And with trauma, what happens is if it's overwhelming, something is overwhelming at the time, we feel powerless, helpless, we feel like we're in danger, then we will find a way to leave the scene. And one of the ways that we do that is we store the traumatic memory in our body as energy. So as we're doing this healing work, what's coming up is the associated memories are stored in the energy in our body, and that's part of why it's so scary for us to go into them. The content of our thoughts and the content of this energy and the sensations in our body is our memories and our experiences. And in yoga philosophy, they talk about that as the chitta, the storehouse of memories in the mind. A lot of memories in the mind are just kind of pretty neutral, and then some of them are of somebody who's who you really care about, then that's going to have a different kind of feel in your body than a memory of fear or something that was going on like that. So one of the ways that we work with pictures is we can put a frame around it, like you're watching it on a screen, seeing it as on a frame. If you're having your eyes open, it can be very helpful with images. You can put it on the wall across from you, you can put it on a window. Again, what we're trying to do with this is we're trying to remember that we're not in a situation again. We're bringing back a situation, or we're working with a memory of a situation. Another thing that we do is we tap on it, and there's a whole EFT system of tapping, but what we're doing right now is just 2 fingers on the forehead, and we use it to remind ourselves. So we listen to the sound of that on the forehead, and we feel it on the forehead, and we take our attention into the feel and the sound of it and away from the image. So maybe people could just do that for a moment and just kind of notice what that feels like. So bring up some kind of an image, put it in a frame. If you're looking out of your own eyes at something, see if you could put yourself into the picture. That's another way that we remind ourselves that we're watching something. This is a memory, not something we're doing right now. And then eyes open if you want, eyes closed. And then bring your attention into the tapping on your forehead. Just notice the sound of the tapping, the sensation. Take your attention away from the picture and into the sound and sensation. And then stop the tapping and look at the image again. And usually what happens with images is that they become less intense. It helps us again to remember that, in fact, this is an image that we're looking at. It's not something that's happening right now. And another really great way to work with this is tracing. We've got this image in a frame, and we take our eyes up to the top and then take them all the way around at the bottom, up the other side. And we do that a couple of times in each direction. So if everybody want to do that just for a minute, it doesn't take much time. So take your eyes around in the other direction. And then when you look back at the image, just notice what the image feels like now. Oftentimes it gets kind of blurry or faded. It doesn't seem as real. And so again, this is another simple tool to use to help remind ourselves that we're looking at a memory. We're not back in a time when it was dangerous for us, that we're actually looking at a memory. When we're doing this, we want a way that's helping us to stay stable and helping us to stay present with the observer, the witness role. So if you want to have your eyes open, I've done a lot of eye open work with trauma. It can be very helpful. And sometimes people like to have their eyes closed so they can visualize it differently. But however you want to do that, our aim here is always to maintain our role as the witness. It's natural for us to get drawn into this stream of experiences and thoughts. And then at some point when we're watching that, we're going to get kind of sucked into that a little bit too much. And then we bring ourselves back. As soon as we notice it, we bring ourselves back. And this stream of thoughts that might overwhelm us can happen, but also we always have this stability and the silence and the ability to stop and go, okay, yeah, that's right. That was a thought. It's not actually happening right now. I can, pay attention back in my body. You could hold your hands. Sometimes it's very nice to rub your hands together. You could notice your feet on the ground. There's practices of box breathing and different things that we'll go through a little bit later. There's always a way, as soon as you notice it, to not shame yourself for doing it, just to go, oh, okay, here we go, come back, and then get back grounded into the body again, back into the witnessing. So those are some of the ways to work with thoughts. And the thoughts that are neutral don't really cause us any trouble. It's the thoughts that are connected with some kind of trauma that have the intensity. And a lot of the intensity is in the sensations, it's the energy in our body. So the minding questions are to kind of ask ourselves, what's that sensation doing here? So if the sensation feels too intense, then we don't want to go right into mining or into asking it necessarily. Sometimes a sensation or an energy feels like it's like, yeah, okay, you're finally paying attention. Yeah, I want you to just be really present here, and I'll kind of let you know what I know. And so one of the ways that we might do that is if you have like a pressure in your chest, for instance, you could put your attention into that area and see if you could go right into the center of that, if that energy kind of will let you in. And I know that these kind of words are a bit awkward when we're talking about things like this. But could you kind of be present with that energy as though you're inside of it, looking at it from the inside out? And sometimes it's like, no way, that's not safe. That energy is too volatile. It's too much. I'm going to lose control. It's going to blow up my world. And that's not going to be something that feels like a good idea. So you always want to be kind of checking that out. If you can go into it, it's good to do that, because then you can have a dialogue and say, what are you here for? Do you want to tell me something? Are you trying to warn me about something? It's usually something like that, the energy, because this is stored with memories and associations from the past. You can back away from energy by noticing the space all around the energy, and that can be very helpful. Sometimes we feel like a certain energy is just like the whole universe, but in fact, asking questions like, does it go right to the edge of my body? Okay, no, it's right in the center. Or does it feel like it's kind of pulsing or moving? Does it feel like it's hot or cold? Does it have an image? If it does, I could look at the image and maybe tap on it. So we're getting familiar with the energy in our body, and this is the kind of work that can be very helpful to work with a facilitator with. And people self-facilitate these all the time as well. So I'm not saying you have to. It's just that sometimes having someone else there can help us to remember to stay on track in terms of, what is this here for? What does it want to tell me? Like, why is it here? Or maybe, what does it want to hear from me? That's another thing that we do with these two. The instructions on mindfulness meditation are often to just be present and observe what's going on. And that includes thinking. The thing about catastrophic thinking, though, that's often a response to trauma. And we actually don't want to give catastrophic thoughts a lot of airtime. When you mentioned you're getting anxious and then you go into singing, part of what you're doing is distracting yourself from the catastrophic thoughts. And so we can do that a lot of different ways. I think the first step is to notice when we're doing it. It could be ruminating, we're just kind of chewing something over. It's so common when we're feeling uncertain or afraid or we're triggered by something that we get into catastrophic thinking. And it might look like, well, if this happens, what am I going to do? Well, I could do this and this and this. And well, what if they say that? Well, then I could, it could be that kind of thing. What if, worst case scenario kind of thinking? One of the things that happens when we do that kind of thinking is it alarms us. We don't breathe it properly. We start to kind of hunker down we brace ourselves. And so it's really good it's almost like, you can have a Google alert for something and it'll alert you if your name comes up in a post or something. We need that for catastrophic thinking. So it's the second that you notice that you're catastrophic thinking, then do something to stop. So it could be that you just go, oh, here comes the catastrophic thinking again. I'm not going to do that. Or if it's a little bit more persistent, you might need to do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or shake it out, or remind yourself somehow. But that is the one thing that we have this delusion. If we worry about something enough, that it will be easier for us to handle if it happens. And it's actually the exact opposite. All we're doing is draining ourselves of energy. And if anything happens, we're not going to have the capacity and the resilience because we've worried ourselves into this state. And to go back again to Gabor Mate's definition, the effect of trauma is that we disconnect from ourselves, from our sense of value, and from the present moment. And so everything that we've talked about can be fit into that structure. And the thing about disconnection is that we can heal it through connection. And the reason that we don't connect is because of some kind of fear. And oftentimes we're afraid of going in and really paying attention to what's going on in our body, because at the time that it was stored there, it was overwhelming and we didn't have any choice about it. We were frightened and we felt alone. But now the person who can be there with us is ourselves. As we do this healing work, we start to really trust ourselves. If your experience has been that every time you have a negative thought come up that you turn against yourself and you blame yourself and you berate yourself, then it's going to take a little while of not doing that before you start to trust that you're not going to do that. It is possible. We can turn the ship around by doing something different. We have to really work with this capacity to be present with ourselves and connect with ourselves. And then that's the real healing. I wanted to mention the breath. The breath and the nervous system are what's causing all of this reactivity. So we have events that happen, we are afraid, and that gets lodged in a nervous system in the fight, flight, freeze. And then one of the ways that we can relax our body is to work with the breath. And if we're really tight into the fight, flight, freeze, oftentimes we can't really do that. It feels like it's too much. The idea of working with the breath is similar to working with thoughts or working with energy. It's that if it feels comfortable for you to use your breath as an anchor, then do that. It's a wonderful way to calm our body and calm our system down. And we've got a lot of different practices that we can do. We can do just even breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. We can do a longer exhalation. An exhalation of 6 seconds helps to calm our nervous system and instigates the relaxation response. We can do box breathing, which is helpful for kind of if we're starting to panic, we can do that. So there's a lot of ways that we can work with the breath, but sometimes it's counterproductive to work with the breath. And what happens is with the freeze response, and I think probably everybody could kind of relate to a deer gets attacked or something by a lion, and they just kind of freeze, and it's like they stop breathing, and then they hope that the danger is going to go away. And if we think about ourselves as children, sometimes that's what we do too, or as adults as well. So we're under some kind of threat, and we get really small and really tight and really quiet, and we hope that the threat is going to go away. And if that's the case, even to breathe can feel like it's too dangerous, because we could alert the predator that we're here. And so our breath gets very, very shallow. We almost stop breathing. We're not diaphragmatic breathing. We're just kind of breathing very tightly in the chest. And we're very quiet. We're in a form of freeze. And so if that's going on as you're working with these, the memories and the energy in your body, then it's good to be really mindful that working with the breath might not be the right thing at that time. I'm a yoga teacher, meditation teacher. I work a lot with the breath and with relaxing through the body. And I really believe that we have to, at some point, work with the breath in order to heal our nervous system. It's a very, very effective way to heal the nervous system. And again, with that being the witness, really observing what is it that is happening with my breath right now. If I'm holding my breath, would it feel good to go break through that, or would it feel like that's going to be too much? And if it's too much, then use that as a signal as well that it's not a good idea then to go right into to continue on with working with the energy of the thoughts, to come right out of it, do a practice that will help you to stabilize again and ground back into your body. If we're so triggered that we're into that freeze to the point where we can't really feel safe breathing, then it's a good idea to step back from it. That would be another signal. It's very difficult for most people to feel compassion for themselves. One of the ways that we can kind of get around that, or kind of come in from the side on that, is to think about a situation where you are in some kind of trouble, you're feeling threatened somehow. Maybe you could just bring up an example if you want right now. We'll work with it as we're talking about this. One of the things that often happens is that we feel like we should have been able to handle that differently. So, whatever it is that you're working with, notice if you really feel compassion for yourself right now. And if not, what's holding you back from that? What are the thoughts about that? And you might notice there's an energy in your body. You might notice, well, I shouldn't have been so affected by that. It was, they didn't mean anything by it, or they were just teasing, or whatever it might be. You might notice that there's some kind of self-talk around that. And then let that kind of resolve and bring your attention now to someone else who has the very same experience, somebody that you care about. It could be a really good friend or a child. If someone else you knew had the very same experience that you did, would you think the same towards them? Would you have compassion for them? What would your experience be with that? And notice just how you feel in your body as well. If it feels good, notice your breath. What are the kind of the words that you're using? What is the kind of talk you're using around that? What would you say to that person who's suffering somehow? And then let that go. Just notice the difference between the two. We're often so harsh with ourselves and much kinder to somebody else. So we want to get to this. I love myself. I support myself. I'm on my own side. And so part of the work I find in healing trauma is to work with this. This could be a practice all in itself, to look into the mirror and to look into your own eyes and say, I love you, and not recoil in horror or think, yeah, right, I don't believe that. But so many of us have trouble doing that. And with time and attention, that can be such a transformative practice, just to look in your own eyes, or even put your hand on your heart and close your eyes right now and just say to yourself, I love you. And let yourself feel that. And notice if it feels true, if there's resistance, what's your experience with that? And so this is something that we could really work with. Why wouldn't we be on our own side? Why wouldn't we support ourselves and love ourselves? And incidentally, that's the best way to heal. But it's certainly a lot better when we can feel like that. What would you say to comfort yourself? One of the things I say all the time with people, and it's because we do blame ourselves. We feel somehow our child experiences is that we have to do something so we feel more safe, we get ourselves out of the situation. One of the things I say all the time is it is not your fault. And it's true. We can look at it now. I mentioned, if you have a mother who had depression, or someone in the household that was raging or with an addiction, that's not our fault. And there's not actually nothing that we could do to change the adults in our life. And so that alone, if we could really, really accept that there's nothing that we could have done, it wasn't our fault. So as you're doing this work with yourself too, to just reaffirm that it's not your fault. You weren't to blame. And to give yourself those affirmations of I love you, I accept who you are, I'm interested in knowing who you are. I don't need to shove you off to the side and be afraid to know who you are anymore. I can handle now being present with all of who I am. And this isn't a practice that happens in 5 minutes, that's for sure. And yet it definitely happens. I mean, I don't have any kind of leftover self hatred or shaming at all anymore. I have a lot of compassion for who I am and what I've been through, and I can really understand and feel empathy for that. But I just don't have any kind of shaming, self shaming, or criticism or anything like that anymore. So I know that that's possible. And what would that be like? What would that feel like just right now in your body? Could you imagine if you really support yourself and really love yourself? What would that feel like?